So education as we know it is always changing. Like in the last 3 weeks, we've gone from kids enjoying going to school, some kids thinking like, oh, school's boring, and all these other. Oh. 5, 4, 3. Education reform. One of the many movements during the 1800s as America was changing. But education is still reforming. It didn't stop in the 1800s. It didn't stop at the end of Manifest Destiny. Education is continuing to reform every day. In fact, there's education reform going on right now in 2020. With everybody learning from home, this at-home distance learning is causing governments and local district administrators to have to reform and change the way that we teach and learn. People are always going to Washington, D.C. and to their state capitals, even to their local school boards, and asking for school reform. They want the best teachers. They want the best technology. And they want the best thing for the kids. So they have usually peaceful protest. They exercise their First Amendment. And they enjoy getting results. When they don't get those results, they make their voice heard at the election polls. And they make sure they vote people that will care about public education, because they want their children taken care of so that they can have every opportunity possible to live a happy life and be a productive citizen of the United States. Now, educational reform in the 1800s was brought on because, well, education just wasn't that important to people. And a lot of kids that weren't going to school were causing problems. They were not wanting to work. They were stealing things. Some were setting fires in small towns. And a lot of people believed if we just put these kids in school and give them something to do, then once they grow out of their childhood shenanigans, then hey, maybe they'll be better for it. Now, Horace Mann, he grew up poor, and he only went to school 10 weeks a year. That's about 2.5 months. The rest of the time, he was working, and he did not like that. He thought he could learn a lot more by being in school. So he went all the way through college, and he became a state supervisor of education in Massachusetts. And from there, he helped to lead this educational reform, pushing a lot of the government to go to building better schools, allowing more people to go. Because in the 1800s, if you didn't have money, you didn't go to school because your parents couldn't afford it. And if you weren't white, you definitely weren't going to school. And if you did get to go to a school, it was usually a separate school that didn't have near the same kind of funding. So Horace Mann aimed to end some of that. He really wanted to bring everybody together in the classroom. So for an example, abolition, women's rights, protecting the mentally ill, prison reform, improving the conditions that prisoners were having to live. All these things were going on. And so this was another one of those reform movements that was happening all at the same time as America was changing for the better. Now, reforming education was super important. If you look at the pictures, you can see what these kids were doing when they weren't in school. This was hard labor. This wasn't easy, okay? And so a lot of kids thought, hey, I'd rather be learning about reading, writing, and arithmetic, all right? They thought that's the best thing for me. But in reality, okay, we needed people to work, but we also needed educated people to work, because an educated worker is a better worker, more efficient. And if you're more efficient, then you can help make more money for your family, for your company, and then that just trickles down to everybody. So education became a staple of the 1800s in terms of making it better, making it more efficient, and making sure everyone had a chance to be educated. This is a classroom from the 1850s. Let me correct that. That's a school from the 1850s. That small wooden building would have one teacher, and if you look at the sizes and the ages of the students, Not the little one on four legs with the tongue hanging out. That's a dog. But the small children as early as 6 years old and the older children as much as 16 years old would all be in the same room with the same teacher. Most of these teachers were ill-tempered, had very little patience for those shenanigans, and they would carry around rulers or these things called switches, which is kind of like a tree branch that's been sharpened and honed to very fast use on knuckles and backsides. And they would conduct their lesson as they saw fit. Wasn't really a principal, not really a school board. If the teacher wanted to paddle you in front of the class, they did. If the teacher wanted to send you home and throw you out of the school by your ear, they did. So a lot of people felt like that wasn't the best way to teach kids, So they tried to improve it. We see a little bit bigger school here in the 1860s, okay? You still see the age range from teeny tiny kids to older kids, and there's just a couple of adults in that picture because teachers weren't paid that well. Schools weren't funded that well. And that's why Horace Mann believed public education has to be funded by taxpayers. Okay? If we take a little bit of tax money from everybody and we put it into this one big fund for education, we can pay for everybody's school. And we still do that today. Schools got bigger. Classrooms were put in so that the smaller kids could be in one classroom and the older kids can be in another classroom. And they did this because they wanted to make sure that the lesson you were receiving was better for you. If you think about our school today, our 8th grade alone couldn't fit in 10 classrooms. Our 8th grade would spill out of this building. Like the kids that are sitting on the top, that would be our classroom today if we tried to put all of our 8th graders in here. So education reform was more than just let's make education important and make sure everybody gets a chance. It was about truly improving the infrastructure, the size of the buildings, the technology of the time, making sure that, water was readily available if possible, and make sure that heating was available because, we're not talking about air conditioning and heating units in these things. We're talking about having a stove that was made out of iron, usually cast iron. And if you didn't keep it hot, you had kids that were going to freeze, and nobody's worried about education when they're freezing. Okay. They might be thinking about thermal transfer and convection and radiation, but that's about it. So I leave you with this. Education reform, it's always changing. What can we do to make education better?